history. You can stay for part of it, you can stay for all of it. I will try to make it as brief as possible. It's 100 years though, and I've been researching for a few months, so I could talk about lots of different things. But 100 years in Ellsworth Public Library. I'm going to start out kind of like setting the stage for it being 1924. It's kind of hard to imagine 100 years ago for some of us. Some of us maybe not. But how many of you know somebody who's 100 years old or has lived to be 100 years old? Like right now? Yeah. Not all of us are lucky to get that far. But it's a very progressive time in U.S. history. There's a lot of people that are becoming more comfortable, like financially, some, not all. And so there's kind of this growing, they call them the leisure class. I don't know if I really agree with that, but there's this growing number of people who are a little more educated, maybe are a little bit better off, and they're very interested in helping those less fortunate than themselves. It's also a very civically minded time. People are wanting to get involved in their communities, and that's a lot of where the growth of the library came from. But by 1924, the library wasn't necessarily a hugely new idea, but the public library was kind of a new idea. There were some private libraries in Ellsworth before our public library. As early as 1877, there has been mention of some private libraries, but it cost you money to be a member, and only members could have access to the books. And then around the turn of the century, there was a woman, Ludi Stearns, up here. We had a really wonderful program yesterday at the Senior Center about her and the free libraries, traveling libraries in Wisconsin. And the speaker, Stuart Stotts, has written a book about her and her books in a box. And he graciously let me record the presentation yesterday. So on our YouTube channel, you can watch his presentation for the next 2 weeks. So if you're interested and want to, you can get a chance. But basically, if you know what a Little Free Library is today, this was kind of similar, and the Little Free Library movement actually kind of adopted Ludi as their kind of patron saint of little libraries. And so basically what they were was a box that would get delivered to a post office or a general store, somebody's house, a logging camp, and it would stay there and people could borrow the books, and then after a few months, a new one would come and replace that, and then that box would go to somebody else. So it was kind of a rotating library. And so that grew out of the Free Library Commission that was established in Wisconsin in 1895, and their goal was to help communities set up libraries. But in very far-flung rural places, like Pierce County was at the time, this was kind of the first way that we could get a public library or have people have access to books. So then this idea started kind of floating around. We've got these traveling libraries, but what about a brick and mortar library that we can have for everyone? Because you had to have transportation, you had to be able to get around a little bit to find those traveling libraries. And so this idea kind of took hold with all of these different civic organizations in town, and they started corresponding with the Wisconsin Free Library Commission. There's actually a letter there from 1923 from a Miss Edna Jones, who was a history teacher at the Ellsworth High School, and she was inquiring about how do we start a library. And one of their big questions in all of these letters was, is there funding for a public library? And the answer was always no, but that didn't stop them. They held luncheons and teas. They had book drives, so had people donate books, and they ended up with this small collection of books, and for a few years there was a kind of neighborhood library that was free to everybody in Dr. Munger's house. And then they finally decided that Prescott and Spring Valley and River Falls, the year before us, had libraries, so let's make this happen. And so this group got together and they called out for all of these groups to elect somebody or appoint somebody to a library board, because once we have a library board, we can create a library. And so there were 18 different civic groups that banded together, and there was a representative from each of those. And in June of 1924, the library board was put together and chosen, and they put that collection of books into the Firemen's Opera House, which was the first community hall here in Ellsworth. But right away, they knew it was not the right spot because they were right next to the bowling alley in the hall, and they had dances and all these different things at the community hall, movies, they showed their plays, all these different things, and so it was not really a match made in heaven to have a library right next to the bowling alley. So right off the bat, two things about the library: never enough money, and where are we going to put it that's better, a more suitable spot. So this group of people, this 18, this was the first library board, and then they chose officers, and throughout the history of the library, there are going to be some names you might recognize, because some of these people started in 1924 and were a part of the library until they passed away. Some of them even helped get the library started and passed away before they even got to see how much their work would pay off. This is an article that has a little bit about being next to the bowling alley in it, and I liked the wording in it, but I'm gonna skip that for now. So they're searching for a better place for this library, and you might recognize this building. It was known as the Comebacker Building for a while, but now I think everybody in town calls it the Lord Abstract Building, because it started out, the Comebacker family had a law office here, and then Orrin Lord was in there. The Pierce County Herald newspaper offices were here, and so Orrin Lord decided, okay, I'm gonna squish my office into this back room, you guys can have the front room for your library. And so in 1925, there was a grand opening celebration for the library in this location. And in that year, there were 416 patrons or borrowers, card holders, and they checked out 2,407 books. Wow. Which is very different than now, you'll find out. There was talk about starting a children's story hour as early as 1926. I haven't found any proof that they did it, but I haven't found any that they didn't. So I'm hoping and dreaming that there was story hour going on that early. The first librarians in the library were Grace Bittner. She was the very first librarian. She only did it for a very short time. She later went on to serve in the Women's Army Corps in World War II. Very well known in the American Legion Auxiliary group even today. And Mrs. Mary Gilbert, I don't have a picture of her, I'm hoping to find one, was the second librarian. And then I do not know 100% for sure that this is Maddie McLaughlin, but I'm pretty sure it is. I found a picture of her much younger, and based on what I saw there, that's her. But I'm waiting on confirmation for that too. But she was the librarian for 20 years. And during this early time of the library, the Wisconsin Free Library Commission would send people up from the library school in Madison to check up on libraries and see if they were doing okay and to help them get started. So The UW-Madison Library School was only the 9th library school in the country. So there were some really well-known Wisconsin librarians. Some of them went on to other states. One of the people that helped get the library started here became the first woman dean of a department at the University of North Carolina. So Wisconsin and libraries are kind of leading the pack in the whole country. So it was, the library wasn't in the Fireman's Opera House when it burned down in 1932, but it paved the way for this building, which you all know very, very well, to be built, which is the new City Hall. It was very, very important that they replace the movie theater. So they said, well, we're gonna build this new community hall, movie theater, and in the basement, we're gonna put the library and the village clerk and bowling alleys. And it was the library in one shape, way, or form of another for 89 years in that building, which is a lot out of our 100 years to think about it. But if any, those of you who are familiar with the senior center, which is still there now, the library started out in the basement in kind of the room where the director has her office now. I think it might have even been split and smaller from what people have kind of shared with me. And then in 1948, they got to move to bigger quarters across the hall, which is where the kind of meeting room in the senior center is. And then in 1963, they were bursting at the seams, so they added 16 feet to that room for the library. And the Lions Club purchased some new lighting for that room, which was probably very helpful. And then in 1970, the movie theater finally closed, and there was the opportunity to move the library upstairs. So that happened in 1975. But there were walls that kind of divided things, so it wasn't the whole upstairs still, it was part of the upstairs. And this is one of my favorite things. They got the 6th graders from Hillcrest Elementary School to form a human chain to get the library books upstairs. So they just passed the books to each other and got those right upstairs to save the library board some work. And they were very excited to have a children's section and plenty of room for the books for a little while. And I found it very interesting that even here in 1975, the library hours were the same, except they added in Fridays for summer, since they had been open in 1924. So they were only open about 10 hours a week. And then I think this added like 4 more hours. And this probably started to look more and more familiar. In 1995, they had about $140,000 some renovation to take over the whole upstairs of the library, and most of you probably remember that space very fondly, as do I. And in 2019, we had 2,823 card holders, and we're circulating over 65,000 books and materials. So come a long way since our 400 and some, and our 2,000 books. A little bit more about some librarians. Sarah Bird Reed was the librarian for a while, but she is one of those people that she started on the library board representing one of those organizations in 1924, and she became the library board president in 1932. And she served until she resigned her office to become the librarian in 1947. And then Mrs. John Anderson and Mrs. Anna Hagerman, some of you maybe remember them, I don't know. I'd like to know more about them, but finding Mrs. John Anderson, I don't even know what her first name is really hard to do on the internet. There's a lot of Andersons. And then there was kind of a group of director librarians that stayed for a short time. And then there's probably more familiar people here, to our present director, Tiffany Meyer. So I know all of you know Shelley, or a lot of you know Shelley and Lynette and Margaret Levenhagen. Margaret did a lot for the library. She really brought it like into the computer age. And really, I feel like she really, just based on what I read about and learned about, the library kind of chugged along, and I feel like she became the director librarian and a lot of stuff happened. I think she worked really hard for that. And then of course, our new building in 2023. We had a wonderful grand opening event and been here a year and a half and get nothing but compliments from visitors about how wonderful our space is. And still get people coming in who've not been in here before with their mouths wide open at how beautiful it is. So thank you to all of you for your support of this new building for all of us. And then every year we do an annual report for the library, and I thought this was good to kind of get an idea of the numbers, because even before the first year was over in this library, the number of new card holders was phenomenal. It went up, as you can see, 167% in 2023. And I know this number is more in the last 6 months, but we had 577 new card holders in 1 year. Usually we maybe get 200, if that. And our visits to the library have increased 67%. So we are much busier and are enjoying that. And then of course there's still about 64,000 some checkouts, but that doesn't include e-materials, like all of you who might like Libby. That's another 12,000 checkouts of materials. And of course we have all these wonderful new spaces and lots of wonderful stories about the library and what it has done for people in our community. We are very excited. We're having our centennial this week, and that we will be able to, we got a grant, so we'll be able to increase accessibility by putting handicap accessible doors on the Kinney Street entrance in this year. And of course we're always working towards that mission, which is the same mission in 1924, which is to increase access for people in our community and to meet the needs of our community, and we're always constantly trying to do that. But all of these people who've done all of this work to have this library here, I feel like that is only part of the story, and actually the real story is the impact that all of that has had on the community. And so to end with, I actually put this together for our gala event, but the real story is the people. And I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. Because I just went through the history already. But to me, this is the real story of the library, is all of the ways that we touch the community and bring the community together. So I just wanted to end with some pictures from the last 8 or so years of all of our different programs and all of the people that we've had on staff. And because to me, you guys are the real story of the library. So, do you have any questions for me? I feel like I went really fast, but I was trying to.
Were there any Carnegie libraries in this area at all?
I do not believe so. Maybe like northern Minnesota there might be one or two. Something I didn't really talk about was, I did mention it in the newspaper article, but a lot of the people from Madison, whenever they were answering a letter from somebody from Ellsworth, they kept saying, have you thought about doing a county library? We really want to get a county library started in Pierce County. So they wanted a central library with branches And Pierce County wasn't having it. Nobody in Pierce County, none of the villages and cities they didn't want to be the county library. They wanted to be their community's library. They wanted it to say Ellsworth Public Library, not Pierce County Library. So that idea never really took off, except for, when the systems started to get together and we became a part of the library system, but we were still the Ellsworth Public Library. And I think that says a lot about the communities here and how proud they are of where they come from and who they are as a community. They're not Pierce County, they're Ellsworth or Prescott or River Falls. So.
When I was young.
And there is kind of a history display in the vault history room. If you're interested in looking at a little bit more, some of the articles are there, and there's some more pictures and a few books and artifacts there. Any other questions?
You guys have those books for sale?
We do not. I don't know if the Pierce County Historical Association still has any, but that would be who I would reach out to. I have it right now, but we do have one in our collection. There's one that you have to use here, and then we have one that we're adding that can be checked out. But not being from Ellsworth and not growing up here and living in River Falls still, I'm a transplant. It's been very fun to learn about the community I work in, and kind of informs me a little bit more too about kind of the fiber of here. So. And I would welcome anybody who remembers, the old library or the downstairs library, to come in and chat with me anytime. I'd love to keep collecting information and stories. And if you remember any of the older librarians or know somebody who might, I would love to find out more. So. There's kids in some of these pictures that are graduating, so.
You should have showed it to the band.
Century Saloon.
Yeah, but you can tell I love my job. Welcome to stay and watch the pictures, or if anyone has any more questions.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
happy to answer.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Please take a souvenir ornament with you. When they did the 19